The funny thing about orgasm in men and women is they're actually incredibly similar. So when I look at the traces from our anal devices, when orgasm occurs, we cannot distinguish men from women. Their contractile patterns are the same. So in some sense, we try and make this, I'd say a mountain out of a molehill, like, oh, men and women, they're so different, Mars and Venus and all this. And I was like, well, at some point, the orgasm itself is a reflex. And so when that cascade starts, it kind of proceeds the same male, female, otherwise, according to those contractile responses. Brain response is similar. Like, we don't go in and say, oh, men have frontal lobe activated and women it decreases. Like, that process looks pretty similar as far as we know. There's not a ton of research on that. So some of the big differences seem to do with latency. So women have a much longer latency to experience orgasm as compared to men. And then there's some things we're still experimenting with to try and figure out whether or not these are differences. So for example, I don't know if I'm skipping ahead, but we had tested a group of women, and at one point in the study, their only job was to press a button when their orgasm started, and when it finished, that was it. We controlled the vibrator from another room, and we were monitoring all their body response. And about half the women, when they pressed the button, were looking like there's no contractions. Like, why did you just press the button? And the first thing you always assume it's us, like, oh, it must have fallen out. We're not recording properly. We checked all those things. We're like, we're good. Like, everything is functioning. And eventually we decided our instruments were correct. And so about half of the women we tested, which is not a huge sample, were not having contractions when they said they were having a climax. So then the question is, well, what happened? What was that? So now we're trying to figure out that puzzle, but that may be a huge gender difference because we have never seen that in men.
Is it fair enough to say, like, so that is such a mental thing that is happening with women and there's no physiological response?
Well, so my collaborator and I are fighting about this. So one possibility is that it's an education issue. That is, women don't know there's supposed to be contractions. Why would you? Guys get feedback on this because they have ejaculate. They say, oh, it happens, I can tell. Why would women know that? We don't teach them that. They don't know to look for that. So maybe they just don't know, and they're misidentifying it. The other possibility is what you're describing, that like women have mental orgasms and they have physical orgasms. And we just have never documented that brain state before. I don't think that's the case. I'm in favor of the former one, actually, which I always thought was funny because my collaborator's a guy, and he's like, no, women know what's going on. I was like, no, I don't think they do. I was like, this is a funny gender reversal. But so right now it's a puzzle. We don't know why it happens, but for some reason, like women very commonly say or believe, like they know we're measuring them, so I don't think they're faking. They believe they're having a climax. They press the button, and we can't see physical evidence of it in their genitals.
It's fascinating. I will say one thing that I am absolutely jealous of is like men have a very long refractory period.
Part of what we looked at is we had a few women in who, in one case, was very vocal about, I have this capability, I can have so many climaxes. Those were the women who weren't having contractions. So I think there's a huge underlying issue here that we don't know what's happening because we weren't looking. The very, very few studies that look at orgasm response in the lab never measure genital physiology. They're looking at the brain typically, and this is literally there are 3 of us in the world. So it's very, very tiny. There's just a few of us. And those other labs, one in particular never measures genital response. They just go by the button press. And so I was like, well, how do you know what that was? And the other one sometimes does, we always do. And so when we look at these women who say, oh, I have 5, no problem, I had 40 one time, and we're saying, really? Because I just looked and you had none when you said you had 1. So what does that mean? Does that mean these women are reporting some incredibly high level of functioning that's not real? Again, I don't think they're faking. I don't think they're trying to misrepresent. But I think, in the next 10-ish years or so, when we start to get these data out, it's going to raise a lot of questions about what is a multiple orgasm? Is that real? Is that just because when women have contractions, they look like the guys and have a longer refractory period? Or is it the same women who could have multiples that have contractions are like the guys who can have multiples? Because some guys can. And we don't have good definitions of those yet. Like, what is a multiple? How close do they have to be? Like, can they be 3 minutes apart? What if they're 6 minutes apart? So all of those things are still up in the air.